Welcome to the Jungle, Bengals fans. I'm your host, Kyle Phelps, and today I'm joined by my colleague at Around the Block, Vance Meek, to talk about the Bengals' upcoming bye week and what comes next. Before we get to that, I just want to remind you that if you're enjoying the content, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel. We're going to be putting out a lot more content like this, 4 or 5 times a week, depending on what happens. So you're not going to want to miss any of it. But anyway, say what's up, Vance.
How's it going, guys?
What's been twice stabbed? You try and take my life, but
Just trying to get a feel of how the Bengals are going into their bye week. I really kind of feel like the bye week kind of comes at a good time because it's like, I don't remember if you remember the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last year, how they got off to like this really hot start and then kind of stumbled into their bye week. Then they came out after their bye week and they won all of their games on the way to the Super Bowl. I'm not necessarily saying the Bengals are going to do that, but I am saying that this whole like the bye week coming right as we kind of like start getting jumbled up and a lot of these young players are kind of like forgetting to actually do what it takes to go out there and win games might not be the worst thing in the world.
Oh, absolutely. Comes at a very good time. It's always nice when your team's bye week, unless there's an injury or something that you kind of need, like maybe your quarterback has to miss a week or two for something like that. It's always good to have your bye week at around the halfway mark. The Bengals have been pretty fortunate lately. I believe theirs was right in the middle last year as well. This week it comes almost, there's no exact middle now that we play 17 games, but it falls right pretty much in the middle. The Bengals had played 3 straight road games. Going into that Jets game was the third of 3 straight. And then they had, coming off that, a tough matchup against a really good roster in Cleveland. So it's definitely a good time to get a little break after that. And then the second half shapes up with a lot of home games. And then, having not to play so many road games in a row really is a big deal.
So where did you expect them to be at, like record wise, going to the bye week? Like at the beginning of the season, what was your expectation?
They are exceeding my expectations. I thought they had a chance to win maybe somewhere around 8-9, 9-8, somewhere in that range. I thought was sort of the max, and I think that's easily surpassable at this point, assuming that they can right the ship after these last couple of tough games.
Yeah. I think at this point, if they finished 8-9, I would consider it a disappointment based on what they've done throughout most of the season so far.
Yeah,
now,
I agree.
The last 2 games were a huge disappointment, but I don't think that we can let that quite take away from just the impressiveness that they were able to put together through the first 7 weeks of the season. Like, that doesn't go away just because we had 2 awful games. Now, you still have to pay attention to these 2 games because there's some really worrying trends, I think, especially with the defense where, the film's out there now. Like, this is how you beat this Bengals defense is you throw short passes, you throw to the middle of the field, you get dudes out in space and these guys can't tackle. And now the rest of the NFL is going to be, paying attention to that. Luckily, I don't think a lot of the Bengals, the rest of the Bengals opponents, particularly match up quite as well as the Jets and the Browns did, except obviously when we play the Browns again.
Right.
But I'm also hoping that the Bengals will be a little bit more prepared for the Browns going into that next week. Baker Mayfield's never lost to the Bengals, so I think. I think Zach Taylor has still been figuring out how to beat that team. He figured out how to beat the Steelers. He did that last year, and it was glorious. He's now figured out how to beat the Ravens, and I think he sort of started figuring out how to beat the Ravens last year. He just couldn't actually put it together. So what we saw a couple of weeks ago was just the amalgamation of that.
The thing with the Ravens is that they basically created their own blueprint that beat them last year. They came out and just were perfectly willing to run 0 blitzes and blitz from all angles. And all you have to do is watch the tape, figure out the trends, and then have Joe Burrow with an extra year of growth, of course, going into his year 2 technically. Understand how to beat those blitzes, and that's what they did.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. I felt like, the biggest key for them last year, and I said this actually on one of the first episodes of the Battle of Ohio podcast. I said the way I think to beat the Ravens is just admit that Lamar Jackson is going to use his legs to create big plays. That's gonna happen, and you're just gonna have to get used to that happening. Do what you can to confuse him as a passer and make him beat you with his arm, because he's gonna do stuff with his legs. But at the end of the day, he's not going to win the game if he has to do everything with his legs. So just try to make him make some mistakes in the passing game, and that's how you have to beat the Ravens. And I think that's how the Bengals beat the Ravens this year.
Yeah, that's exactly what they did. He had a few runs where he would get 7-8 yards. He didn't have the play where he got loose and ran for 75 yards. They only gave him, I believe, 80 some total yards rushing in that game, and that was no long runs. It was a bunch of 5-yard runs, 6-yard runs, 8-yard. They didn't give up the big play with his legs, and that's something that they did in the past, is that he would get free and he was scrambling 60 yards instead of just 6 or 7.
Right. And it was really good to see them, especially with the way that this defense has been, especially after last year was just ridiculed for how badly they've been doing, and now they're kind of getting back to it, and you're starting to kind of wonder, is Lou Anarumo the guy we all thought he was? I made a few Twitter posts apologizing to him, like, hey, I was calling for your head last year. I apologize. Clearly, you've got this figured out. Now I'm like, all right. So I'm not yet ready to start being like, we need to fire Lou Anarumo again, but I am kind of at the point where I'm like, all right, prove me wrong again.
There are a couple of key weaknesses on this Bengals defense that teams are exploiting in the last couple of weeks, especially. Yeah. Lack of an interior pass rush is hurting them right now, because teams are able to, when Hendrickson, who has played fantastically, is getting into the backfield, the quarterbacks, particularly Mike White last week, is just stepping up into a nice empty pocket where there's plenty of space and making a quick throw to a running back out of the backfield, or a tight end, or a quick slant, or whatever, and they're able to escape pressure. They need that push up the middle to force quarterbacks to stay back there, and then they're bait for Trey Hendrickson, or even Sam Hubbard if he rolls that direction, even though Hubbard's not a great pass rusher. But if quarterbacks are able to constantly just step up into an open pocket because there's no push in the middle, then it makes their jobs way easier. Quarterbacks hate interior pressure, and the Bengals aren't getting enough of it right now. And then, of course, weakness at cornerback, in that their starting cornerback is hurt. Their cornerback 2 is now Eli Apple, who has played fairly well at times this year, but is still susceptible to – he's still Eli Apple. He's not a top-notch player, and you can question Trey Waynes, and a lot of people did. I have on the, especially considering how much they paid him, but he's an improvement over Eli Apple.
And I think that's why you see people, like, even though it's not actually something to get that excited about when you really break down the actual, like, specifics of the situation, but that's why you have people out there getting excited when we go sign a Trey Flowers, or we go sign a Vernon Hargraves. I actually saw people on, Bengals Facebook, which is at the moment notorious just for being just trash. But I saw a post on Bengals Facebook recently about how the Bengals just absolutely need to go sign Damon Arnett right now. And while that is absolutely just ridiculous, because outside of the whole the death threats and all that was terrible. But outside of that, he hasn't even really been a good football player in the first place. So. But I think the reason people are getting like that is because while Eli Apple has had some flashes of being competent, you need the competence to be the standard, not just something that he does sometimes.
Yeah, and it helps that Arnett is a former Ohio State player. Bengals fans love their Ohio State players, which is part of the reason that they supported the Apple signing as much as they did. But yeah, you're right. The consistency has to be there, because he can play good for 80% of the game, but if they're in that 20% that he is not playing well, he gets beat for a 66 yards, I think, touchdown pass, then it's still 7 points, regardless of how well he played the rest of the game. He's got to be consistent, and if he's going to get beat, it's better to get beat underneath than let his man go over the top, and it's happened multiple times this year where he's just let this guy go past him.
right? And he's done that a few times this year. But I think if the defense can kind of figure itself out, this offense, for all the sins that the offense has, I think that the offense is good enough to win games if the defense can also be good enough to win games. Like if they can put a truly balanced product on the field, because like Joe Burrow needs to fix the interceptions, I get it. Jamar Chase needs to not play the way he did against the Jets and the Browns, I get it. The offensive line has improved a lot, but they also have certain issues. I'm not sure what's going on with Jackson Carman. I thought they were starting Trey Hill because Jackson Carman's dealing with a bit of an injury, but from what I heard from Marissa Contepelli, apparently that was a coach's choice. So I have no idea what's going on with Jackson Carman right now. But there are some issues on the offense. But at the end of the day, this offense still is putting points on the board. The offense is still finding times to put a winning number of points on the board, and it's just like, the defense has to play up to par too, because the offense can't be expected to go out there and score 40 points every single game. So they've got 7 games left in the season after the bye week. They got the Raiders, Steelers, Chargers, 49ers, Broncos, Ravens, Chiefs, Browns. That's Raiders, Steelers, Chargers, 49ers, Broncos, Ravens, Chiefs, Browns. They got 8 games left, as I said.
Yeah.
So, what do you think out of those games? How many? What would you say would be the most likely number of wins out of those teams? Do you think?
I don't see any reason that they can't, at the very worst, end up 4-4 in those games. That would put them at 9-8 on the season, which may be good enough for the playoffs, maybe not. And I don't think, and I think it's also important that, and I mentioned this before as well, and even on Twitter, it's important to remember that this team's window wasn't really considered to be this year. Like their Super Bowl window was always considered to be 2022 and 2023, Burrow's 3rd and 4th years. While he's still under his rookie deal, they can add some extra pieces. This year is more of a bonus year if they can make the playoffs and end up having a really good season, which they have to this point. Being over 500 is certainly nothing to scoff at, despite the fact that they how those last 2 games went. But there's no reason that they can't match up with most of those teams going down the stretch. The Chiefs are really good if their offense is in sync, and it hasn't been for a large part of the season. The 49ers aren't nearly the team, at least up to now, that they have been the last few years. The Raiders are struggling right now with off-the-field issues and had a terrible game this past week. The Steelers and Ravens, we've already watched the Bengals beat them once. The Browns, you'd obviously like to see a revenge type of game against them. Maybe, maybe not. But there's winnable games in that. They're not outmatched by any of those teams, especially roster-wise, unless you want to count the Browns as that as possible, potentially an elite team, depending on how you feel about Baker, I guess. But those
and that's just a matchup thing, really.
Yeah. There's no reason that they don't match up well. The Bengals don't match up well enough with the rest of those games that you could see them winning 4. You could see them winning. I could see them winning 5 to 6 of those. They're capable of doing that. They're not outmatched by any of those teams.
Right. So going into let's say even 3 weeks ago, a lot of people were saying like, oh, it's the second half of the schedule that's really going to be the tough one. If they can just get through the beginning of the schedule, like people were like, oh well, they're if they actually make it through and go 7-2 through their first through before the bye week, then there's a good chance that that they could be really well set up for this really hard portion of the schedule. But the thing is, since those feelings were kind of like, I think, put out there into the football ether, you've got like you said, the Raiders have pretty much just been collapsing. They just lost to the Giants, which I think is an indication that yes, they were able to overcome the John Gruden thing, but then you had the Henry Ruggs thing, then you had the Damon Arnett thing. Now, obviously the Damon Arnett thing, we haven't seen the result of that on the field yet. But the Henry Ruggs thing, I think, was a little bit too much for them to overcome. And now you've got this extra thing on top of that. The Steelers, I don't think the Steelers are a good football team. I'll be honest with you. Like, they remind me a lot of that team that started out 11-0 last year. And if you recall, they went 11-0, beating bad teams and barely beating those bad teams, which is why I said that I didn't see them losing 0 games after going 11-0, but I saw a collapse coming at the end of the year. The Chargers have not been playing like the Chargers, or at least the Chargers that we thought that the Chargers were after they got out to such a hot start. The 49ers, people are starting to ask if Kyle Shanahan is the right guy for the job. That's how bad the 49ers season's going. The Broncos did just beat the Cowboys, but other than that, they've the Broncos. I would say, other than the Browns, are probably the team that I'm most worried about going forward, and that's just because they did have that hot start and they did just beat the Cowboys. So maybe there's something to it. Is that game in Denver? I believe it's in Denver, right?
I want to say it is, but I can't remember off the top of my head.
If it is, in fact, you know what, I had it in front of me. I don't have it in front of me anymore. But if that game is, in fact, in Denver, then that'll be part of it. Traveling all the way out to the western United States could be an issue.
Atmosphere.
And that's actually my biggest concern about coming off the bye week to go play the Raiders. Now, they will have the rest week, so maybe that'll help with them having to travel out to Las Vegas. But at the same time, the Bengals historically have not done super well when they have to travel out to the west side of the United States. But do you expect them to, a couple weeks ago, they looked like shoo-ins to make the playoffs. Is that still an expectation for you now, after they lost 2 games in a row?
I don't want to necessarily call it an expectation, because I think the AFC in particular is so wide open right now. Like anything can happen. We just saw the Bengals go from the number 1 seed in the AFC to 4th place in their division and not in the playoffs at this point, if it were to end right now, in a span of 2 weeks. So the AFC is going to be pretty wild down the stretch. I really don't have any feel for what might happen. But I think this is a litmus test for the coaching staff, really. If they come out in the second half and they can't figure it out and they go, let's say, 3-5 down the, to end the season, 2-6 to end the season, then I think you go into next offseason really, really questioning whether or not Zach Taylor and Lou Anarumo are the guys going forward. If they go 5-3, 6-2, even 4-4 maybe, then I think that they've proven that they can make adjustments and coach around because the issues that they have, because that's what they're going to have to figure out in this bye week, is how to mitigate the weaknesses that they have, especially on the defensive side of the football, and figure that out. If they can't figure it out, they're going to lose more games than they win down the stretch, and you're going to the next offseason thinking, wow, I don't think we have the guy. I don't think that he's going to be the long-term solution at head coach.
So one last question I have for you before we get going. But if they do turn things around, and I wouldn't even say turn it around that much, because it's 2 games. Sometimes you lose 2 games in the NFL.
Sure.
But if they do turn it around and they end up making the playoffs, do you think this team has what it takes to end the infamous playoff drought?
Absolutely. I think that especially in the AFC, we just talked about it. There's not been a dominant team in the AFC. From week to week, the top team changes. We all thought Buffalo was going to be a legit Super Bowl contender, and maybe they are. But they just lost to the Jaguars 9-6, where the offense was completely sputtered. The Chiefs we thought they were going to be really good. They're pretty terrible right now. The Ravens the Bengals just beat them by 20 some odd points. They gave them a beatdown. The Browns have been average for the most part all year. If you throw out Sunday's game against the Bengals, they've not been very good. So I don't think there's a team in the AFC that the Bengals can't beat.
That is absolutely true. But Vance, I appreciate you joining me for this episode of the show, man. You're my first Bengals guest on this show. So congratulations for that, I suppose.
Thanks for having me on.
So are you calling it? You think the Bengals are going to be 9-8 by the end of the season? Is that your? I think
9-8 is a good realistic goal for me. I would like to see them get to 10 wins, and I think they can. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they can't get to 10 wins, but I think if they can go 9-8 and end the season over 500, then I think that gives them a lot of momentum going into those window years of 2022 and 2023 that we were talking about.
All right. Well, like I said, thank you for joining me, Vance. Thank you, everybody, for listening. You can find more of what I do at Kyle Phelps 92 on Twitter, Facebook.com/The Phelps. Go check out the Battle of Ohio podcast, which is part of the Around the Block podcast network. Go check out more of what. Okay. There we go, StreamYard. Go check out more of what Vance does at the Slobber Knocker, which is his NFL draft podcast. And I know during NFL draft season, that's when you really get super active. I mean, you're always active, but that's when I see a lot of I
mostly
when
just
you're
play around
talking a
during the
lot.
season. Yeah, there'll be some good content hopefully as we get closer to the draft season.
Yeah. So hopefully draft season for the Bengals comes a lot later than it normally does. But then again, lately last couple of years we've already been kind of at the point where we're starting to look at the draft anyway. So
Yeah.
I'm glad to not be there right now. Go check him out at the Queen City Sports Podcast also. And on the Around the Block Sports Network, he contributes for Bengals ATB. And thanks for joining me, Vance. We'll
anytime.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, everybody. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll leave y'all with a hooday.
Good day.